So thank you to everyone for joining this webinar brought to you by the Hive Customer Success Team. Today, we're going to be talking about Hive's newest feature, Hive Automate. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will have a live Q&A with in-depth questions at the end. So we definitely want to hear from you. If you have a question, please drop it in the Q&A section or in the chat and we'll answer it live. If it's super in-depth, we'll save it for the end of the presentation. You can absolutely have a copy of this recording. In addition to being posted on our YouTube channel and Hive University, we're going to be sending a link out to everybody that joined us today. And of course, don't be afraid to hop into the chat. I'll be asking some questions along the way just to get our thoughts going and wheels turning. So feel free to hop in, share your comments, chat with other attendees, and give us feedback. So who am I and why am I talking to you today? My name is Gina Lockwood, and I'm a customer success manager here at Hive. I have over 10 years of experience both on and leading technology and creative teams. In that time, I led the implementation of a new project management tool for my organization. And of course, we chose Hive. I've experienced firsthand as a customer how Hive can ease friction and help teams move faster. It's my passion to help teams work better together. And I'm really excited to share with you all of the ways that Hive Automate can help us. So today we're going to talk about how your team can work better in Hive by leveraging that latest feature, which is Hive Automate. Before we dive into the main topic of today's webinar, though, I want to have some fun. So I'm going to put some quotes on the screen and just give me an emoji reaction if you've heard or said or thought any of these things. It's hard to get everyone to follow the same process. You've probably heard that before, right? Or we've done this 1,000 times. Can it be faster? Yeah, I know I've definitely heard that. I'm doing double work because we need another tool. And my process has too many manual steps. Wow, a lot of love for that one. And I wish Hive integrated with insert favorite tool. One thing that we all have in common, regardless of the industry that we're representing today, is that we run into some of the same issues when we're organizing workflows to work for us. If you've ever heard or said any of these, you're not alone. If you look at the chat, there are plenty of others that agree with you, and you're probably here because you see opportunities to improve the work experience for your team. So it's my goal that you leave today armed with the knowledge to start putting those ideas to work. Let's imagine a world, a new world, where our workspace automatically handled some of those repetitive and tedious tasks for us. Things like reassigning tasks to another person when they hit a certain status, or applying templates from a form when it comes in based on fields on the form. Or maybe our workspace completed Hive actions and then stored that data in a data source. Or maybe we want to receive Hive chat or Slack messages when important things are happening across our workspace. So these are just a few examples of what Hive Automate can help us do, but the possibilities are truly endless. But before we get to building, it's important that we have a plan for what we want to create. So in this example, every time a form is submitted, we have to look at the submission and apply the correct template. We got to look at what customer it's for and move it to the right project. And then we have to tell our team that it's been done, right? So maybe all of these are human steps today, but in reality, the yellow box in our diagram is the one human step that could be required with using Hive Automate. So feel free to put any ideas for what you want to automate in your workspace in the chat. Now, when we know what we want to build, it's time to get started. So let's dig in. You don't need to be a developer to use Hive Automate. You don't need to be extremely technical, though technical users will find it really useful as well. So the first place we need to go is into apps in our left-hand sidebar, and we're going to scroll down until we find Hive Automate. It's got a nice little beta banner here and a little toggly switch. If it is toggled off, you can go ahead and toggle this on in your workspace. If it's already toggled on, you can click open, and you're going to land on this screen here. We call home in the Hive Automate sidebar. So quick familiarization with our interface in Hive Automate. When we first open it, we're going to land here, and it might be empty. It might have a couple recipes already. Like I've got one recipe sitting here inside of my space. On the left-hand side, our home is going to show us all of the different recipes and connections that have been created in our workspace. The dashboard is going to let us see how our recipes are performing, let us monitor them for errors, audit their activity, and see a breakdown of the total job runs. Your page might be blank. Are you referring to your, when you open Hive Automate, you come to this page here? Yes. Okay, let me take a note, Megan. I'll check with you afterwards just to make sure that it's all toggled on in your workspace and that you have access to view. No problem. It may be permissions based. If it's not already toggled on in your workspace, you may need to be a Hive admin to activate it. But once it's turned on, you should be able to come here and then we can start working with our various recipes. So this projects button or section right here is going to allow us to organize our recipes into different projects. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Megan. So we'll look into that for you and I'll follow up with you right after if that's okay. I'll note here. So if we want to create projects to house different recipes in, let's say we're running a bunch of different recipes across our workspace and we want to keep everything nice and organized, we can nest them into various projects. But we're going to head over to that Create Recipe button to open the recipe builder. First thing we have to do when we're creating a new recipe is give it a name and put it in a folder or a location. So no folders exist. We can go ahead and click this drop down and you'll see an option to add a new project and we can build that out directly in this section here. I recommend giving your recipes names that make it really easy to remember what it does. So that way, if you have a bunch of recipes running in your workspace, you have clear context on that front page of exactly what each one is doing. You can see down here as well, we have quite a few different options of how we can kick off the recipe. We can trigger it from an app. We can run it on a schedule. We can trigger it from a webhook or from another source. We can call recipes in other recipes. We can make them into custom endpoints. We can make Slack bots. Many of the recipes that you build will most likely trigger from an app or run on a schedule. So we're going to be using trigger from an app as our starting point in today's session. Look, we're in the recipe builder. Look at us. So we've clicked create recipe. We've chosen that we want to trigger this from an app. And now we need to choose which app will be triggering the automation. So if we remember from my example, I have a form, a Hive form that's submitting to a specific project. So I'm actually going to use Hive as my trigger here. I want my recipe to listen to that special project that I've stood up and then do some more fun things with that later. So I'm going to choose Hive. And then on this next step, we're going to choose our trigger, which we'll configure on the last step. So on the connection, basically what we'll do here is we'll select next new updated record. If we're using Hive, there's only going to be this one trigger. It's a very flexible trigger. So we will go ahead and select that. And then on step 3, we need to pass our Hive API key and a few other key credentials. So if we need to locate these, we can do that by going into our Hive workspace, just up to our little avatar icon here, and then into Edit Profile. Edit Profile is going to show us this API info tab down here. And that's where we'll be able to get our API key, our user ID, and our workspace ID. Parentheses and blue circles. Now that's interesting. I'm going to take a note for you as well, Monica, so I can follow up with you afterwards. We'll take a look and see what's happening there. Okay, so we've got our API keys and our user ID and workspace ID, and we'll plug them in. And then on the next step, this is where we'll configure the trigger. So in this is a really important step. We're going to choose in this object dropdown, there will be action and project available in this dropdown. So we'll choose which one we want to work with. In my example of wanting the form submission to look at the project type and then apply a template, I want my recipe to only trigger when new actions are coming in to a specific project. So my settings may look something like this, where I've selected the object type of action. I only want it to fire with new actions that are being created in this project, which I've called project intake. We can also set additional trigger conditions here if we want to have more and or conditions around this trigger, but we'll take a deeper look at those here in just a few. So our trigger setup, Hive Automate knows what we want to listen out for, and now we can start figuring out what next steps we want to take. So under the actions part of our recipe builder, we'll see this little plus sign, and we'll click on that. And you'll see what we can do next. We can take another step in an app. We can create if or if else conditions. We can do repeatable actions, and we can call other recipes into this recipe if we'd like. We could keep it really simple if we wanted to just take that next step. So I'm going to go back to my example here. My project brief is submitted. It's a form where one of the fields on the form, the one that indicates the project type, is actually mapping to the title of the action card that's being created. So I'm identifying what project type was chosen, and then I want to apply that corresponding template. And for the rest of this demonstration, I'm actually going to switch over here now and work live in Hive Automate. So we'll actually step back in apps. If we open Hive Automate here, I can create a new recipe, and I'm going to give it a really great name that makes it easy to remember. Let's say conditionally apply template from a form submission. Okay. I'm going to put it in a folder. I have one already set up here, so I'll add that here. And we're going to pick trigger from an app and start. And I'm back in the builder. So I will connect my app here. You can see once you've set up your connection one time for that app, it's going to be available in Hive Automate for you to use going forward. So I've already got my credentials stored. I'm just going to grab them. And now I can start setting up my trigger. So if we remember from my screenshot, I want just actions that are new for my example. And I only want to listen to a specific project. I can start typing here and search and narrow down my projects and hit OK. If I have multiple projects I want to listen to, I can do that as well. And then if I toggle on this trigger condition, we'll see extra options to be able to start mapping new conditions here. I'll cover the data pills here in a second, so we'll learn more about what those can do. So the next step, once I've got my trigger set up, is to hit this button here. And if we remember from my example, I am going to need to look at a few different conditions. So I'm going to use this if statement here. And this is where we'll start looking at the data and how to pass it from one step to another. So in my if condition, I've got some fields over here to work with in this recipe data tab at the bottom. When you set a parent project, will it automatically include all new projects open under it? So a project will still only be created once, but it would be possible to create an automation that spins up multiple child projects and nests them under the parent that you just created. Totally possible. Great question. So I'm going to open this little recipe data tab down here. You've got a few different options. I can open it small, I can open it big, and I can dismiss it. Hide. I'm going to open it big so we can actually see what's happening in here. Each of these little blocks that we can hover over is a data point on this step that we can pass from one step to another. So let's say, for example, this new title came in, and I want to say if the title, I'm going to just grab this title button and just drag it over. And in my condition, I have all of these condition options: contain, start with, end with. I'm going to say if it contains the word marketing. So we looked at my form for just a moment, but my question says what project type, and it says like marketing, operations, sales, or technical. So I'll say if this contains, the title contains the word marketing, then I want to take a next step. That next step is going to be in Hive again. And these are all of the actions that we can take within Hive. We can make new records, new projects, new actions. We can delete records. We can list records or update records. What I want to do is update. And I can update an action, a label, a project, or a resource assignment. And in my case, I want to update an action. And it's a specific action, the one from step 1. So in my action ID, I'll pull up my data section again and make sure I'm on step 1 and just drag over that ID. So now it's updating the action ID of step 1. Any of these other fields I want to overwrite, I can include. I'm going to put my title in here to make sure that my title comes over just the way I want it. Let's say I wanted the title and then have more information, like approved. You know, we can add additional details here at this step if we'd like to override what the data is coming in as. I have this, let me click back here. This optional fields available will be another section that's on each action. So no matter what action, if I'm updating something, I'm creating something new, I probably have some extra optional fields to work with. So if I click into here, I can see and select all or just some of the fields that I want to see, and they'll be added to my list here. So what I want to do in my example is when I've selected or the title of my new action comes in as marketing because it was selected in the form, I want to put the marketing template on that action. So in this action template field, I'm going to just find my template, boom, and add it. Now, let's say I have a few other conditions I need to loop through. I could go to the plus and hit and make this again. I can also click and highlight to copy, and then I can copy like this and then hover, and I'll see my little clipboard and I can paste. Oh my goodness, I just saved all this time. And then I can just come back in and change what values I need to change. So let's say if it says it's operations, I want to apply, I'll go to my next update action, scroll down to the template, the operations template. Maybe I want another condition. I'm just going to copy this again, paste it again to say if it, open this one up and say if it's sales, I want to update the template to be sales template. And just for fun, I have one more option in my form, so I'm going to add that 4th option here. And it is if the title of my action card contains the word technical, we'll apply the technical template. Coding, but we're not coding. It's so great. So we have all of these different options. If it contains marketing, add the marketing template, ops, and so on. There's one more step we may want to take, which is what happens if our recipe triggers and runs, but it doesn't find anything. We'll hit this stop job here so that we can tell the recipe if you don't find anything, did it fail or did it succeed? So I want it to be successful still, it just didn't find anything. So I can add this here at the end so that my recipe doesn't just keep restarting and trying to find my information. All right, so we've got our recipe here. I'm going to hit save and test. When I'm testing the recipe, we'll see this screen come up and it's just going to be listening out live and it's going to tell us what's happening along the way. So I'm actually going to go into my workspace now and I want to trigger this recipe using as close of a workflow as I can of what the users would be doing, right? So I'm actually going to go into my form. It's called project brief here. It's a very detailed brief. So we're going to add our project details. We need this preferably yesterday, right? What is our request type? Remember, this is mapping to the title of the action card that's being created, and that's what Hive Automate's listening for. And then the due date that I have on here, let's pump this out to April 29th and submit. Ooh. Now let's go back into Hive Automate and see what happened. It ran, it was successful, hooray. And we can scroll down and see exactly what step. So it didn't meet the marketing condition, but it did find operations in the title. So it created this action. Pretty cool. And then let's go back to our workspace and take a look at this request and see what happened. So based on it finding operations in the title, it went ahead and populated it with my actions here. And they are dated in alignment with the due date. They are kind of backdated or forward dated as needed. So any date that I put in on the form is going to trigger the dates of my template. And you can see a couple other examples. I have a technical one that I submitted, and it has our technical template backdated from the due date in the form. I've got my marketing one, which looks a little bit different as well. And we can continue to take other steps. We can pass this to the next project. We can assign this to another person. We have a lot of options of how we want to continue our automation from here. So I'm going to go back real quick and we'll recap. Our trigger is where our recipe starts. This can be on a schedule. This can be triggered from something in the app. All of the other available options that we saw earlier. And we can set conditions on that trigger to only look for objects that are matching our criteria. Once that recipe is triggered, the actions that we have mapped out here are going to be executed. So we can add additional conditions along the way with if and if else statements. We can interact within a single app, and we can also incorporate different apps. Let's say I want to notify the sales team if the title comes in and says sales. I could add another action that trigger or is an action, let's say in Slack, that sends a message to my Slack team. There's so many different options as we saw earlier, and probably hopefully are thinking of some more now as well. So when we've started our recipe, we're going to be able to monitor all of the different jobs that are performed. Every time it's been triggered, it's been run, we'll be able to see when, exactly what happened, the data that was output, and walk through each step. So if anything goes wrong along the way, or we find that maybe something didn't work quite right, we can come in here and we can see exactly what happened with that recipe and that specific run. We can also see over here the recipe's activity in the dashboard. So how many times it's run, is it passing, is it failing, what's it doing right now? And then click through to see the dashboard, which will show us our total job runs and all of the tasks used at a workspace level. And we can dive deeper into the dependency graph will show us what apps are interacting with other apps in our space. And the activity audit is going to be a full breakdown of all of the recipe runs across our workspace. There are a couple best practices that I want to mention. There is a chance that if you have other actions in your space that also meet the trigger conditions you've created, to do what's called a circular reference. So I may accidentally somehow make this recipe trigger over and over again if I'm not specific enough with the trigger information that I'm giving it. For example, if my recipe says, I want all new actions to look for this in the title and spit out a template, I might see that template in places I didn't want it. So I need to look for just new actions in just this project that match our criteria. So an example of how we can avoid that would be extra conditions on the trigger or extra conditions on our if statement. So let's say if the title contains this information, like the title contains marketing and the parent action ID is blank, meaning it's not a child action or something, then we're only looking at parent level actions for that title, for example. And then the error monitoring. You'll see another option when we are building the recipe to monitor for errors. And we recommend adding this directly below the trigger so that in the event that your recipe fails during testing, you have some more details to read. You can see in the recipe that we've created that I have some details I can look at. I can open and see what happened. But if I'd like to execute this network trace, what I will want to do, let me go back into editing my recipe here, is to use that handle errors option. And we'll actually put it right below the trigger as the first thing, and then make all of these actions nested within it. So that way it's looking and logging errors on every step inside of our action. And the last thing is have fun. Recipes can work beautifully if they're super simple, like this one that I have running over here. If I put a new row in a certain Google Sheet, it'll make a task in my own personal to-do list. They can also be really complex as you need to support your workflow. So workflows should work for us. Let's put them on autopilot. So that's all that I have to cover today. I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts and ideas on what you want to automate in your workspace. So now's the time for questions.